Around 3:45 AM, August the 8th, 1963, a group of around 15 men travelled along this driveway towards Leatherslade Farm. They had just committed the single most audacious crime this island had ever seen.
A hallmark robbery, a one-off robbery.
These men had just robbed a mail train containing £2.5 million, worth in the region of £60 million today, and they were now unloading it here, Leatherslade Farm, just 30 miles away from the crime scene of the robbery.
The press went to town on this, the media whipped up a frenzy, and pretty soon it became known as the Great Train Robbery.
Half a century later, the name would remain. Films, books and tales of master criminals working against the country's best detectives. This had become something out of an Agatha Christie story. And yet, when you scratch the surface, when you start digging into this mystery, the narrative seems far from reality.
Everyone had turned this into some kind of unnecessary drama. Maybe that would work in our favour, maybe it wouldn't.
Welcome to the story of the Great Train Robbery. Malcolm Fretwell, Buckinghamshire's head of CID, was one of the first on the scene.
This was quite unheard of. We were told around 120 mailbags containing an unidentifiable amount of money had been stolen from a train.
And the bizarrest thing of all, a mile north of here, there were now 10 unattached coaches with scores of postal workers still sorting through their letters with absolutely no idea of what had just happened.
Oh, they'd clearly done their homework. The scale of the operation was quite something.
It was the scale of this operation that made the public take this into their imagination, and the press just went wild with that and built on that enthusiasm.
Everyone had something at stake: book writers, filmmakers, the robbers themselves, and to some degree the police. And for the public looking in from the outside, well, they saw mastermind criminals, legendary detectives, sleuth-like in their work, and once caught, these criminals, well, they were handed such heavy sentences they had nothing but to lose than to try and escape.
In the days after the robbery, the public were absolutely whipped up into a frenzy. With all the roadblocks and the newspaper articles every day, it was all anyone could talk about.
So let's step back. It's 6:50 PM on the 7th of August 1963, and the Royal Mail train is set to leave Glasgow for its regular overnight up special, the travelling post office. This train is set to arrive at 4 AM the following morning in Euston. An unknown security officer at Royal Mail had detailed knowledge of this train and the route, and the fact that this day in particular was soon after the bank holiday, well, this meant that there would be additional amounts of money involved. A solicitor's clerk, Brian Field, introduced a security officer to Gordon Goody and Buster Edwards. This would form the core of the gang along with 3 other associates: Charlie Wilson, Roy James and Bruce Reynolds.
So now there are 5 or 6 criminals involved in this robbery, but none of them know how to rob a train. A bank maybe, so they have to enlist another gang.
The South Coast Raiders, who had formed, they were an accomplished group of criminals: Tommy Wisby, Bob Welch, Jim Hussey and Roger Caudry.
Wisby? Well, yes, he was known to the police already. In fact, he already had experience of train robbery.
In fact, the whole gang had experience of robbing trains, each with their own speciality. Notably, Roger Caudry, touted as a technical genius. He knew how to stop a train effectively.
Passing a signal that is red, meaning danger, without permission is something that no train driver ever wants to do. It's known as a SPAD and is completely forbidden. Roger Caudry knew that the driver would always stop at a red signal, so instructed his gang to change the previous signal from a green to a single yellow, and then put a glove over the top of the green aspect of the stop signal and wired up 2 6-volt batteries to the red aspect, and bingo, he had a false stop signal.
The South Coast Raiders were on the team. Whether this was something that Reynolds and the original gang had wanted, unlikely, but in any event, we now have over 10 on this growing team. You see, it wouldn't stop there, because Reynolds in his planning decided that he needed a driver, a train driver, because he was going to have to move the train around half a mile or so. We'll come back to that shortly. Now, he asked around, and an acquaintance of his, Ronnie Biggs, knew a driver, and all of a sudden we now have 2 more on the gang. The journey for this train from Glasgow to London is set to take just over 8 hours. It's midnight and the train is now approaching Manchester. The gang are setting themselves up. Now, Roger Caudry is here at Sears Crossing.
Sears Crossing was a really advantageous location for the gang. The area around here is pretty rural. There's not really any sort of significant habitation other than a few farms dotted around for a good few miles in any direction. And it's on a part of the West Coast Main Line that's long and flat and straight. People who were on lookout, ready to make the rest of the gang aware that the train was on its way, would have probably been able to notice it several minutes in advance of it approaching Sears Crossing.
Now, we don't know exactly where Reynolds was positioned, but it's likely towards a Leighton Buzzard, and he was ready with walkie-talkies to tell the team when the train was approaching here at Sears Crossing.
The train consisted of a Class 40 locomotive and 12 carriages. In those carriages, a team of 72 Royal Mail staff worked to sort all the mail that had been gathered from across Scotland, ready for delivery in London the next day. But what interested the train robbers were the contents of the front 2 carriages. This is where the high value parcels were kept, and included in that was the money that was to be stolen at the time of the train robbery.
Now, the value would normally be around £300,000, but owing to a recent bank holiday in Scotland, this value was getting on 10 times that amount. Around 2:55 AM, Reynolds, further up the track, sees the train approaching, and he uses his walkie-talkie to give the rest of the team the signal the train is approaching. Now, Jack Wills and his second man see the red light, the unexpected red light, and immediately apply the brakes.
This is without doubt the first serious error by the team. One gang member was supposed to take care of the driver, hold him, tell him everything is okay, sit with him. He was 16 stone, this should not have been an issue. Jack Mills, however, fought back. He was knocked unconscious as a result by an iron cosh.
Error number 2 of the day came in the form of Ronnie Biggs' driver friend. You see, Peter had left BR 2 years prior, and some sources suggest that in that period the Class 40 locomotive had a new style brake fitted. Peter couldn't find it.
It looks like the robbery may come to an end before it has even started.
Injured Mills was roused from his unconscious state. The train now stopped just south of Sears Crossing. The team was set in wait over a kilometre south of here at the Brigado Bridge. Mills, under duress, now drove the train south over half a mile to the point where the gang lay in wait. There was a chain system of men now in place on this embankment. They broke into the second carriage, the high value carriage, and they started to unload 128 bags of £1 and £5 notes. And they did so just over here in a Austin Lodestar truck. They were way up to about 2 tons worth of those banknotes. There was a couple of other Land Rovers waiting as well for the men. They would drive off in that direction. 2 Land Rovers, both with fake plates of the same number, drove away in different directions as to confuse any eyewitnesses. They arrived at Leatherslade Farm around 45 minutes later. They even listened to local police radio just to make sure there was no obvious leak, nothing that they would not expect to hear.
I told the press we were going to search a radius of 30 minutes drive or so. Why? Well, one of the Royal Mail staff had been told to not move for 30 minutes. This gave me the indication that the gang would by that time have gone to ground. Reasonably local.
Interestingly, the press took this as 30 miles, not 30 minutes. The gang panicked. This was indeed no place to be if the police would be crawling all over this place, all over the local area. The original plan was actually to stay here for a few weeks. So the gang cleared up the place and they removed every piece of evidence they could that would trace them to the robbery. Or at least they thought they did. On top of that, Brian Field, the solicitor's clerk, was to arrange the place to be completely torched. Curiously, this never happened. In fact, it took just 2 days from the gang's jubilation at their 2.63 million heist, playing Monopoly in this farmhouse, dancing, singing around, to the first arrest.
Roger Caudry was questioned, having been detained in Bournemouth for something completely unrelated. He actually admitted that he had hidden a key, let's just say, on his person, and that we needed a doctor to remove the key. Suffice it to say, the police took the key and traced it to a car containing Caudry's share of the cash, £140,000.
Thereafter, it didn't take much else. With the house not being burnt down, a local farmer had found countless money bags and reported them to the police. This led them to the farm where they found everything. Vehicles left, plans, supplies, and of course scores of fingerprints. What they thought had been cleared clearly hadn't.
If this wasn't enough for us, Brian Field used his own solicitor's firm to act on the purchase of the Leatherslade property. Unbelievable.
There was something else though, not least the amateur actions of the collective, but there was a man called Tommy Butler. Now Tommy Butler was head of the flying squad at the time, and he seemingly had this wonderful knack of just picking off random names that belonged to this gang, and he was right at every single juncture. Now the other gangs at the time that weren't involved often questioned why they were never asked any questions. Every time Tommy Butler picked a name, it seemed to be the right one. You may have got me, but you won't find the poppy. Now that was a statement supposedly made by Charlie Wilson. Edwards and Reynolds themselves said that was extremely unlikely. He would never use that wording, and none of the gang would either. Perhaps this wasn't turning out to be quite the case that Tommy Butler had wanted to put together. He needed evidence. He had the names, we knew that, but he needed some evidence. This really wasn't turning out to be the sleuthing drama that we're led to believe.
Paint was found on Goody's shoe, and it matched the paint that had been found at the farm. But the paint on the bottom of Goody's shoe looked like it had been painted on rather than having been stood in.
If this wasn't enough, the same paint was used to convict a man named Bowl. He was found in the same house as Caudry when he was arrested in Bournemouth. Bowl, with many of the others, was given a 24-year sentence. He would die in prison before that sentence was complete. The police would later admit that this was a miscarriage of justice. Bowl indeed had no part to play in the crime. What now appeared to be unfolding was a complete farce of a case, Butler seemingly given any amount of resources to ensure that this case of such high-profile nature was seen as a victory for justice. 20th of January 1964 and the trial began. It would take around 50 days for a decision to be made.
And what a decision it was. In time, each of the people involved in the robbery would receive 20 to 30 years for their crimes. At the time, that was an unprecedented sentence. The brutality of this crime did not fit with those sentences. The injuries that were sustained to driver Mills, they weren't deliberate, they weren't premeditated. They happened as a result of kind of a bungled part of the robbery that went quite wrong.
The criminals, now in the public's eye, almost became the victims themselves. Reynolds was quoted as suggesting that this changed how criminals now went about their work. Why not take a gun with you? Because it didn't seem to make much difference to the overall sentence if you were caught. Now the iron coshing used on the driver seemed to drive the justification for this long sentencing, and yet the man that wielded it, well, he never was to stand trial. Believed that 3 of those robbers were never caught, plus of course Peter, the spare train driver. Now there's a heck of a lot of speculation that's gone on, and you can read about that in the links below, but it's not really my part to do that in this video. Buster Edwards fled to Mexico but soon returned to the UK, handing himself in. Reynolds also fled to Mexico but moved around quite a bit within the first few years. He came back to the UK where Tommy Butler would find him. He would serve 10 years. Jimmy White stayed within the UK despite some early success in evading capture. Clearly it was only a matter of time. Caught in 1966, he served 18 years. Wilson and Biggs would soon escape prison. Wilson caught and arrested in Canada, and Biggs would have a very different story to them all. He first moved to Australia. After a time he fled to Brazil. It would take him almost 40 years, but he would return to the UK after a series of strokes and ill health. In 2001. 2009 would see him released on compassionate grounds. He died 4 years later.
This was a huge crime with a lot of people involved, and the stakes were really high for the members of this gang. But what none of them could have anticipated was how high profile this crime would become. And perhaps that's what's led to their downfall.
The life they would all have lived in the immediate aftermath, in the years that followed, I often ask myself if it's worth it.
You annoying little train. We're going to do this again.
No! No, why would he do that? He would do it the other way round.
Oh, shut up, you prick. Sorry about that.
So from Mentmore Bridge and the site of the Great Train Robbery here on the embankment above me, if you like this kind of railway tale, we're going to have a look at this video here of Brunel's greatest failure.